Hollywood here. And while this doesn't sound like maybe the biggest villain of the war, as being somebody who was a kid for the first half of it, I was for the first 8 years, I was under the age of 18, so a lot of people consider me a kid. I would say that this plus the video games maybe had one of the biggest impacts on me, far more than I maybe the George Bush mushroom cloud thing really did scare the hell out of me. But a lot of it was like all the war movies and how cool all those guys looked, and the fancy planes that they had, and the Transformers movies. Those guys on the deck of the aircraft carrier saluting next to the big giant robots. That looked cool. Like I was really captivated by that. So I'm interested to hear what you have here.
Yeah. So and this is one of the things that's really there have been some good movies out, but they're kind of the exception. I mean, there's good stuff out there in the last 20 years, but really, when you look at the majority and what most people consume, I mean, I generally don't watch that many schlocky. Michael Bay is not someone I'm a fan of, but God knows it's popular. You know what I mean? Wildly popular, like Transformers movies and Captain America, and all that. And the best person to listen to on this is probably Tom Secker, but you can't underestimate the amount of time and effort the military puts into controlling what gets out there and dangling free access and being able to have a military advisor listed on the credits and getting free military equipment. So in order to make your movie, your Transformers movie, or Captain, was the first really big Marvel one, Iron Man. The military puts a lot of time, money, and effort into getting their hooks in. There was a great episode of something I was listening to recently about basically a TV show they managed to kill. It was called The Code. It was about the UCMJ and the Marine Corps. Basically, the first season was written to be very critical, and they managed to rile people. Like they hid the fact that the Marine Corps was approached approached the writers of the story repetitively, knowing that the story was not going to make them look good. And then they kind of mobilized people to be critical of it. And then the network basically buckled and let them have some editorial control for the second season. And apparently everyone stopped watching, and it tanked after the midway through the second season. They put a lot of thought and effort into making sure that their image is exactly what they want portrayed in every movie where they're depicted. And especially at the beginning of the 20 years ago, I mean, they sat down with Karl Rove, the head of the MPAA, which is the Motion Picture Association of America, which, I mean, the only way I was familiar with them is that they were the little acronym that came before the rating, whether it was rated R or whatnot. Yeah. But they kind of organized and created that, and it was kind of it was sort of, even that was a regulatory avoidance or capture kind of thing, where they were under criticism. The movies were under criticism for being, not regulated well enough, and Congress starts leaning on them and say, okay, well, we'll write our own regulations. We'll regulate ourselves so that Congress doesn't regulate for us. And the MPAA is basically a lobbying organization, but they got Karl Rove basically got in a room, got himself on November 8th, 2001. So we're talking right at the beginning of the war, in a room with all the executives of CBS, Viacom, Showtime, DreamWorks, Paramount, HBO, MGM, and they basically sat down and said that they expect to be represented in a positive light, and that the war is a good, get on board. You know what I mean? We're going along. And what's really interesting is each of the heads, the current head of the MPAA is named Charles Rivkin, former appointed ambassador to France and Monaco, huge Democrat fundraiser, is basically how he got to be an ambassador. But his background was basically in Democrat, fundraising in California, and then being an ambassador and working very closely as an ambassador to coordinate huge D-Day celebrations and get naval exercises and operations. So he's the current head of the NBA. The one before that was a Democratic chairman, was a former senator in the Democratic National Committee, and the one before that was in addition to being a member of the House of Representatives, was on the Select Committee for Intelligence, was served in the External Advisory Board to the CIA and under the Obama administration. And the one before that, for about 60 years, named Jack Valenti. He's the one that sort of initiated this. We're going to work together to propagandize. He was the head of the MPAA all the way back to before to the Kennedy administration, when he was the media liaison for Johnson and was there on the scene when Kennedy took a fateful ride around Dallas. So it's just interesting that every single person that's been the head of the NBA, in addition to being a lobbyist, has kind of, let's say, questionable connections, or at least, intelligence connections, which one might develop over time. But it's just interesting that here we have, we have a military that's very interested in being portrayed the way they want to be, and every person that's the head of the Motion Picture Association, the major lobbying organization that decides how you'll be regulated, is connected very closely.
Yeah. There's I don't know if there's anything here or anything like that, but it is interesting that movies that are fairly violent, like Transformers or the Marvel movies, get ratings that are usually PG, so they could be shown in schools and stuff like that. I worked in a school where Transformers and Marvel movies were like kind of go-to because they're action movies, but you're not gonna there's no way you're gonna get in trouble for showing those, right? Like, but anything that like is maybe a little too sexual, a little too much language, absolutely taken off the table right away. And I'm just wondering if, like, maybe there's some Pentagon influence within like the MPAA, where they just kind of shifting the standard of what's going to be unacceptable, and they seem to have a lot of control over that by how the ratings go.
Yeah, and that's absolutely true. They well, I mean, that's always the discussion that you'll hear from people, or at least the discussion you'll hear all the time, is why can I watch someone be gutted in a movie, as gruesomely as possible, and everyone's fine. No one hardly even bats an eye about that. But you can't see a nipple. You know what I mean?
Right. Or a Sandlot because of the word shit. Know what I mean? It's just stuff like that.
And that goes even further, because that is interesting. Just in general in the culture, it's like that. But how much is that because of the influence of this organization? And then, but then you go a little further to the actual. And again, Tom Secker's amazing on this. But you go a little further, he'll do the what they call the Freedom of Information Act requests to find out exactly what notes were passing back and forth between movies and between movies and the military. And what's interesting is that's what they care the most about. Strangely enough, they don't care about the level of violence. They don't care about any of those things. But they won't support the making of Independence Day, not because it's full of crazy aliens or any of that, but because they didn't like that Will Smith was a Marine officer who was dating a stripper. They would not support, just because the movie, they could have gotten all the support in the world for that movie. Independence Day was not supported by the military, but it was only because the military objected, and for some reason the writers stuck to their ground instead of having his girlfriend at the very beginning, who plays no role in the story whatsoever, but just the fact he wakes up next to her and she's got like stripper heels next to the bed or something like that, and they kind of say that she's a stripper.
There's like one scene where she's in the club. It was one of my favorite.
Really? I don't remember it that well.
Yeah, so. She's like leaving. At the beginning, and honestly, as a kid growing up, I didn't even it didn't register, because I think that movie came out in 96, 97.
Yeah.
And I was just too young. I never got it. I thought she was a dancer, like a ballet thing. I don't know.
Yeah, but it's just so funny, because that's the reason the DoD won't support the movie, and that goes across the board all the time. They'll worry about language. They'll worry about their image. And do they look like poster boys for the Aryan race? You know what I mean? Like they'll worry about that. Not actually, but they're more focused on that. What is the image of a Marine in the movie? When you close your eyes and picture Marine, do you see someone who? The truth is that the truth could. I mean, God knows, biting the bullet or some other guys, but like, truth is. The depiction of Will Smith dating a stripper is probably closer to reality than him dating a PhD like in some other war movie. You know what I mean?
Right.
Like
or she was just like a good stay-at-home mom who just raised the little boy. That's probably what they wanted to portray, is her being like a stay-at-home mom. One thing that I guess I think I picked this up from Tom Secker was especially if we look at the past 20 years of movies made in or about Afghanistan. A couple come to mind: The Lone Survivor, Zero Dark 30, and War Machine with Brad Pitt, which was the one produced on Netflix. And I think they didn't have any influence from the Pentagon in that movie, and that movie doesn't portray the military in a good light. It kind of looks like a failed mission. I mean, it's not explicit, I guess. It doesn't portray the Afghan war well, but I guess it's not like the biggest indictment I could think of. But it's not great. But compared to Zero Dark 30 and the other movie, which are straight up propaganda, it's interesting how that works out, huh?
Yeah, it really is. That it plays a role. The influence they peddle, and it seems, as I was poking around, and I'm not the type of person that pays attention to who the director or producer is, but I did, as I was digging around for this, kind of notice that like it definitely seemed like Paramount was actually the head of Paramount was the one that organized that meeting with Karl Rove, and I noticed that a lot of the major, more propaganda movies are produced by Paramount. It just as not just a general survey. As I was looking through, it just kind of kept being, I was paying attention to that. And also, I don't typically pay attention to this, but I noticed that the major movies, like you mentioned, even though she's only done 2, Catherine Bigelow seems to, like, looking at her record, kind of looking back, like she definitely only portrays the military in a favorable light, and only produce it when she produces something. She's on board. She'll play the notes that the DoD wants her to play about a story, in everything she does. Which is, so keep your eyes open. If it's a Catherine Bigelow movie, maybe don't throw your money that way. You know what I mean? And Peter Berg is even worse. He seems to be their go-to guy. You name it, even if it's schlocky crap. And another thing that was hard to suss out is I did a little bit of weeding through. Like Morgan Freeman's been in freaking everything. He just doesn't care. So like I saw that he was in a lot of terrible, like Olympus Has Fallen, London Has Fallen, and Gerard Butler too. Like but apparently they're just whores. Like they'll be in anything, it seems like. So I kind of weeded those out as saying they're just terrible. But Peter Berg, this director, Lone Survivor, Patriots Day, Lions for Lamb, The Kingdom, Alias, the TV show, and Battleship, which was a ridiculous propaganda movie that the Navy paid for. I never watched. I saw like one video, like one thing about it. Are you serious? This is a thing that they paid money to do. He'll just make anything the military wants him to make, and he's very much on board. I never heard of that director by name before. I don't think he's won any major awards. Maybe he has, but yeah, Peter Berg seems like one to avoid. Right. And then in general, I kind of just noted like. Just the role in general that these fear porn movies played. Some of All Fears, 24, I couldn't even think of all of them, but Some of All Fears and Designated Survivor, like daily drip on television for those that are watching the primetime TV, getting their sort of regular daily drip of you need to be terrified of the terrorists, and you need these secretive criminal agencies to protect you at all times, are kind of up there. I never really consumed those, but my father, God, he watches every cop procedural there is in history, and those sorts of things just kind of, I think, kind of cloud the mind and give people let's be honest, how many people really are paying attention to the media and when the last terrorist attack or who was, are they really paying attention or only paying attention when they're told to? But everyone, or a lot of people in America, could tell you what happened on the last episode of 24. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Obviously that's over with now, but a few years back. You know what I mean? Half of America, probably 2005 or 6 or 7, could tell you what Jack Bauer did last week.
Oh yeah,
You know?
I was a high school boy during that time, and so that was a big one because he was like a cool looking dude and kicked ass and kept people safe, and I believe that was still going on when like the Karyaku revealed the torture program and all that information was coming out, and I feel like that was big for me at the time, kind of cloaking how terrible the torture program was, because like you see it on TV with this guy, and he tortures and saves people's lives.
Yeah,
so
and they show it working.
Yeah,
you know what I mean?
Right.
And that's not by accident. You know.
Mm-hmm.
See, all of that kind of stuff, I'm sure, and I just couldn't even like go through and figure out all the shows. But if you're watching fear porn, or somebody you is, try to find them something better, you know.
And this was actually a conscious choice I made like 7 or 8 years ago. I used to watch like just a couple shows like that. I liked NCIS and Criminal Minds, and in the same season they had like some terrorist hijacked a drone and hit some government building in NCIS, and then they ran a smear campaign against Ross Ulbricht and Silk Road on a season of Criminal Minds. So like I deliberately tuned out after that, and I don't watch any more of that crap. But one thing I've noticed is, especially growing up, it seemed like it was like a lot of it was geared towards like young men, all the war movies and stuff. But now I was scrolling through Netflix, and I got a fiance, so sometimes you gotta watch those rom-coms and stuff like that. They have like, I don't know what it was, like postcards from an aircraft carrier, or like Hallmark movies like about like soldiers, and I think one of them was even like a female soldier like trying to find love, and it's going in a little bit of a different direction now, but it's very interesting to see that they've kind of started to maybe tailor their propaganda towards the young women too.
Yeah. Well, and there's a great bit about like what was it? What's the singing movie that something? The movie where they do like a cappella singing.
Is it newer? Is it the one in LA?
Pitch Perfect.
Okay.
Pitch Perfect 3 was like apparently a DoD production. You know what I mean? So you're right on with that. And then they did, and then there's another, exactly like you were saying, like Operation Christmas Drop or something like that. All these Hallmark, they're getting into Hallmark movies now, and just making sure that they're planted. And this goes back a long way. This isn't just the war on terror. You can go back to Jurassic Park, maybe this was after 2000. I don't know, when the Jurassic Park 3. The Marine Corps paid to make sure that it was the Marine Corps that rescued them at the end. Just bolt us in. We had nothing to do with the story, but at the end, the Marines just show up and pull everyone off the island. You know what I mean? And they paid a lot of money to get the privilege of just just inserting themselves into this story about dinosaurs.
Yeah.
To make sure
they have a nice little one-liner before that where the kid looks out and sees all this stuff, and he's like, "Oh, my mom called like the Army and the Marines," or something like it's something like that. And like then there's like this nice zoomed out view of like the ships moving in formation, and like they're like preparing to like invade Normandy or something like that. I distinctly remember that scene though.
Yeah, it's crazy what they do, but they just planting themselves in there everywhere. Just drip, drip, drip. They're trying to fill your mind with like that the military is the only, like, it's crazy how far they'll go. And